model so far, we have equal proportions of road and mountain bikes, 50% each, and we have equal proportions of our three different tire size, 33.3% each. And that's because we set the item types using the code duniform, because that's the default in Flexum. But there are other ways or other codes that can be used to assign not exact same values. So I'll show you two different ways to do that. The first way is the simplest, but not the smartest, because you can do less with this information than the other way. But in our trigger for the source, where we set our item type and color, we can remove that and say set item type by percentage. And since we want two items, 1 and 2, I can set these each to, say, 75% mountain bikes and 25% road bikes. And hit OK. And when I reset run, you'll notice there's no more green and red associated with item types because we haven't set the colors. And we also notice that our mountain bike processor is much busier just by visually looking at it. We can see it in the results here too, because we're creating 3 times as many mountain bikes as road bikes right now, based on what we incorporated into that trigger code at the source. We could also use a table to read information and assign different proportions of mountain bikes and road bikes. And initially, you won't really see why you'd ever want to do this because it's a little bit more time consuming. But after you get to use global tables, you will see that they're very flexible in the different ways that they can be used. So we're going to add a global table to store information on what percentages we want mountain and road bikes to be in. And there's a very specific format that we have to put this table in. So I'm going to go under this little toolbox, which you can either click up here or click here and use the plus sign and say global table. So what happens is you get this new screen come up, and there's not a whole lot here, and it's got 1 row and 1 column. We're going to, because we have 2 item types, we're going to add 2 rows, and we need 2 columns, because the code that we use to read a global table looks for item type 1 and 2. It wants you to tell it the item type, number, and the percentage here. No, sorry, percentage goes here, what my proportions are, and then what item type you'll assign for that particular proportion. So I said 75% item type 1 and 25% item type 2. And I'll name this to say bike mix. That's the percentage mix I want for these bikes. And then in my model, I'm going to go into my code, and I'll delete the old code that's in there, and I'm going to add a set the item type by using a formula called Dempirical. See, it pops up there for me. And Dempirical requires the name of the table that you want to read from, and it will set the item type and color that way. So Dempirical requires that percentage be in the first column and item type be in the second column that you've assigned. So when I reset and run this model, now I do have colors assigned, and when I run this for a few minutes, I'll see that, again, it looks like there's 3 times as many mountain bike products as road bike products. I can tell that basically from how much the processors are working here and just the Q color downstream. So again, it's critical that we have these columns in the right order. I know I started to type item type in there first, and then I paused it because it didn't feel right. I just haven't used it in a year. But in order for the code to work, you have to have percentage in the first column and item type in the second. And you can add as many columns and rows as you want. So if I had 4 different item types and I had going 20, 20, 20, 40. I could add that in there. I can also add other data and read this table later on. So if I wanted to associate a processing time with item type 1 and 2 for the mountain bike, maybe it took 40 seconds at the mountain bike processing time to add the shocks, and it only takes 30 seconds to add the frame for the road bikes. I can use that by reading that information under this processing time. So it just has a standard 10 in here, but I can change that by saying um, global table lookup and say, okay, my row matches the item type number. The table name is bike mix. And I'm going to look in column 3. And now that's going to take a lot longer, 40 seconds instead of 10. I can do the same thing here. Global table lookup. Look up my global table, bike mix. And I'm going to go to column 3. It's going to read item type 2 in the flow item. And then reset run. And now we're going to have even more buildup in the queue because these processors are taking way longer. From 10 to 40 here, from 10 to 30 there, because I'm now reading this column, column 3, in global table bike mix.